Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into a highly relatable scenario today, one that might actually make you look around nervously. Have you ever caught yourself completely, and I mean entirely, lost in your own head? Well, you're definitely not alone, and the psychology behind why we do this is absolutely fascinating. Picture this. You're in the shower, right? And somewhere between washing your hair and standing there completely motionless for 11 straight minutes, you have rehearsed an entire argument with someone who doesn't even know they've upset you yet. Or maybe you're driving. You're cruising along the motorway, and you've just delivered the absolute most articulate, devastating comeback to something your manager said in a meeting literally 3 weeks ago. Your timing was impeccable. Everyone in your imaginary room was quietly impressed. And then, honk. A car horn snaps you back. You suddenly realize you're doing 47 in the fast lane, wearing the facial expression of someone accepting an Oscar. If any of that sounds familiar, you are experiencing a very specific neurological phenomenon. So, why exactly does this happen? Why does this internal simulation sometimes feel so much better, so much more magnetic than our external reality? That is the core question we are answering today. We're looking at a specific type of mind where this internal world isn't just a fleeting thought, but a truly captivating destination. Section 1. Living inside your head. Let's look at how this goes way beyond what we'd normally think of as just spacing out. Because for a certain type of mind, this starts to feel way less like a quirky little habit and much more like a place you actually live. And honestly, the reason this isn't talked about very often, or at least not accurately, is because the people who experience it are usually the very last ones to think anything is wrong. Why? Because from the inside, stepping into this imagined world doesn't feel like a problem at all. It feels like profound, genuine relief. Section 2. The Default Mode Network. It all starts right here, with the neurology behind where these elaborate daydreams actually come from. Say hello to your default mode network. This is the specific network in your brain that lights up when you are not focused on the outside world. Basically, when you stop paying attention to what's right in front of you, this network activates and just starts generating your memories, your fears, your fantasies, those rehearsed conversations and imagined futures. It is doing exactly what it was designed to do. But here's the thing. For most people, it's just an occasional feature. For some, though, this network basically becomes the brain's preferred setting. And that is a massive neurological shift. When your brain begins to treat that internal simulation as more rewarding than the outside world, external reality really starts to suffer by comparison. The real world begins to feel thin, flat, and like it's entirely lacking substance. Your brain simply finds the environment inside your head far more satisfying than the one outside of it. Section 3. Maladaptive Daydreaming Defined. Let's see how clinical psychology finally put a name to this incredibly vivid experience. Back in 2002, clinical psychologist Professor Eli Sommer formally identified this pattern. He called it maladaptive daydreaming. Now, sure, that term might feel a little clinical, and maybe it doesn't capture the full emotional weight of the experience from the inside, but it's the most grounded framework we currently have. Professor Sommer found that this wasn't just some simple distraction. People were spending hours, sometimes the vast majority of their waking day, inside narratives they had built entirely in their own minds. We are talking highly detailed worlds, recurring characters, and complex plots that evolved over months and even years. And this brilliantly illustrates the core conflict. Almost all of these daydreamers had one major thing in common. The fantasy world gave them something the real world hadn't. And it's not escapism in a lazy, avoiding your responsibilities kind of way. It's about seeking control, emotional resolution, or a version of connection that feels completely safe. Real life is full of friction, right? Real people are unpredictable. Intimacy is terrifying, it's slow, and it's full of uncertainty. But in your imagined world, you have absolute control. You can toss out a fake conversation, rewind it if you didn't like how it went, and make the other person finally understand you in a way that actual humans never quite seem to do. The daydream never disappoints. Section 4. The Shame Spiral. Let's shift gears a bit and look at the inevitable dark side of relying on this coping mechanism. Over time, the brain basically learns that its emotional needs can be perfectly met internally. And when that learning becomes strong enough, stepping back into the frustrating friction of real life genuinely feels worse than just staying in your head. This leads to a compounding cycle. Step 1 is deep immersion. You're 30 minutes deep into finally saying that thing you never got to say when you were 14. But then comes step 2, resurfacing. You pull out of it, and it carries this weird, heavy, emotional aftertaste. You know the real world kept moving while you were gone. That triggers step 3, guilt and shame about the lost time. And how do you cope with that sudden influx of shame? Step 4, you retreat right back into the daydream to soothe yourself.
The shame feeds the need deepens the habit, and the habit starts swallowing up the space where your actual life is supposed to be happening.
Section 5. A creative coping mechanism. It is so crucial to understand who exactly does this, because I promise you, it's probably not who you think. People always assume this is just something novelists or extremely creative artistic types do. Not true. Some of the most imaginative people in the world don't do this at all, while people who have never written a single word of fiction might do it compulsively every single day. It's also not based on overall intelligence. Research actually links this to a personality trait called higher absorption. This essentially means having a deep, immersive focus. The people most prone to this are the ones who get completely, totally lost in a piece of music, or who can't watch a movie without feeling genuinely emotionally wrecked for hours afterward. They simply feel everything much more intensely than the average person.
Because they feel things so intensely, they needed to build a room where they could feel things on their own terms. If you experience this, it is incredibly important to understand that this behavior is not inherently a flaw. Statistically speaking, people who develop this pattern just needed an exit door that the real world wasn't providing. Maybe your home wasn't safe. Maybe you were chronically lonely in environments that were supposed to be welcoming. Or maybe you were just a little too sensitive for the particular world you landed in. This imagined world was the most creative, least destructive way your nervous system found to cope. The daydream wasn't the problem. Originally, it was the brilliant solution.
Section 6. Bringing fantasy to reality. As we start wrapping up this explainer, let's look at how to gently map this incredibly rich internal world onto your actual life.
A lot of times, the immediate knee-jerk reaction is wanting to just fix it, to completely eliminate the inner world entirely. But research in psychology suggests that's actually the wrong approach. The goal isn't to become someone who never disappears into their own head. The goal is to figure out what that disappearing is actually doing for you and to start slowly building a little bit of that into your reality. So ask yourself this. What does that imagined version of connection give you that you are currently not letting yourself ask for out loud?
And ask yourself this too. What exactly is the scenario rehearsing that you're too afraid to actually live? What fantasy version of resolution are you denying yourself from pursuing in the real world? Because let's be honest for a second. The fact that you can build entire worlds inside your mind with deep emotional nuance, narrative coherence, and highly realistic characters, that is an impressive capability. It's a genuinely remarkable trait. People who experience this are sitting on an enormous amount of internal richness. It just hasn't found the right outlet, the right person, or the right moment of safety to exist out there in the real world yet. And that brings us to this incredibly poignant thought. The tragedy isn't that they imagined so deeply, it's that somewhere along the way they decided that depth was only safe when it was invisible. If you've been watching this explainer and feeling a quiet kind of recognition, the kind where you suddenly have to remind yourself to breathe, I really want you to take this away with you. You adapted quietly. You adapted privately in a way nobody ever saw and nobody gave you credit for. It was a profound strength when you needed it most. So nothing about you needs to be fixed. The only question now is, how much of that brilliant, invisible depth are you finally ready to let the real world see?